Lucy stepped further into the room and pulled a chair out, sitting down carefully. Edmund leaned up against one of the cabinets, and Peter took his place beside one of the doors.
"So, Jill,"
Lucy said cautiously after a moment, watching the younger girl thoughtfully.
"Eustace wrote to us that you were excited about meeting other Narnians."
Jill flushed eagerly at the thought, and she nodded enthusiastically.
"Oh, yes. Scrubb told me about some of your adventures, but I couldn't remember everything."
She turned to Peter and gave him a shy grin.
"Scrubb said that you were given the northern part of Narnia. Did you spend much time with the Marshwiggles?"
To her surprise, all three of the Pevensies groaned aloud, and then Edmund and Peter burst out laughing.
"Did we spend much time with them?"
Edmund gasped in hilarity.
"Peter, do you remember when—"
Mudgloom visited the chair?
Peter finished with a grin.
How could I forget?
Lucy giggled, and an impish grin lit up her face.
"I don't think any of the Wiggles ever forgot that incident either."
Jill put her head to one side and gave the Pevensies a puzzled look.
"What incident?"
she asked, wondering how such glum and melancholy creatures could produce such a hilarious memory. Eustace raised an eyebrow and watched his snickering cousins with curiosity that was not unlike Jill's.
"Yes, what incident?"
He echoed Jill.
"I don't think I've heard this one yet."
Lucy, regaining control of her giggles before either of her brothers, began the story with a mischievous smile.
"Well, it was about 3 years after a coronation. Most of the Wiggles had been in hiding during the White Witch's reign, and they were just beginning to trust humans again."
She giggled, and Jill gestured impatiently with her oven mitt.
"And?"
"And so,"
Lucy continued, biting her lip and smiling at the memory,
Mudgloom the Marshwiggle appeared at the gate of Care, demanding to see us."
Edmund stepped forward and interrupted her.
In reality, I believe his actual words were, "I want to meet with whoever is in control of this land now, though I shouldn't wonder if you don't let me in, and even if you do, I'll end up in the dungeon like as not. And if they don't throw me in the dungeon, I'll be turned into stone, I shouldn't wonder, though that's doubtless why the other Wiggles sent me on this errand in the first place."
He said this speech with such a Wigglish expression and tone of voice that everyone else burst out laughing, especially Jill and Eustace. Lucy poked him in the side and shook her head, putting on a serious expression for a moment.
"Yes, Ed. Mudgloom did say that you were the most Wigglish of the 4 of us."
Edmund gave Lucy a meaningful look and patted her on the head.
"I'll have you remember that they nicknamed you Smiley, my dear younger sister."
"Better than being so solemn and glum all the time."
Lucy shot back with a playful grin.
"Not that you'd know, Edmund the Boring."
"Not to seem rude or anything,
Eustace interrupted, giving Edmund a pointedly annoyed look.
but do you mind continuing?"
Lucy giggled and then grinned impishly at Eustace.
"Patience, cousin dear,"
she replied, giving him a pat on the head.
"Not going back to the way you were at BD, I hope."
Eustace turned crimson and looked down at his feet. Edmund, realizing that Lucy's playful words had jabbed deeper than she knew, spoke up in the defense of his cousin.
"Of course not, Lou. Goodness knows he's not as bad as before then. Now stop stalling and get on with the story."
Eustace gave his cousin a grateful look, and then swiped another taste of cookie dough.
"BD?
Jill inquired, raising an eyebrow.
What's BD?"
"Eustace hasn't told you about Dragon Island?"
Lucy asked, giving her cousin a surprised smile as he blushed again.
"That's a story for another time, right, Lou?"
Edmund said hastily, giving Lucy the look. Lucy took the hint and continued with her story.
"Anyway, Mudgloom showed up at the front gate, demanding to see us. The guards almost didn't let him in. They thought he was one of the witch's minions that had escaped in the Battle of Verona."
But then,
Peter put in, grinning and leaning back against the wall as he remembered.
Ed came riding along on Philip. He had been away from Care for a while, for some reason or another.
"I had been visiting the beavers,"
Edmund stated, crossing his arms and trying not to grin, but failing miserably.
And you have to keep in mind, it'd been a long day and I was rather cross and tired.
Lucy rolled her eyes and elbowed him.
"So that's your excuse, is it?"
She asked with a grin, and then turned back to the others.
Mudgloom saw Edmund coming and stopped him. Of course, none of us had ever seen a Marshwiggle before, and Edmund, being tired and cross and worried about this strange-looking creature, did what any self-respecting knight would do. But what probably wasn't the best idea, considering that Mudgloom was supposed to be the Wiggles' diplomat.
What did he do?
Jill asked.
He drew his sword.
Not only that,
Peter continued, barely containing a laugh as he spoke.
he shouted, Black Frogman, taste my steel!
At this, everyone in the room burst out laughing.
You called a Marshwiggle Frogman?
Eustace panted between laughs, wiping the tears from his eyes.
How Puddleglum would have loved to be called a frogman.
Jill giggled, her eyes twinkling.
Not a frog, not a man. I'm a respectable wiggle.
Eustace said, imitating their Marshwiggle friend. Lucy and the others, all having heard the story from Eustace before, all burst out laughing anew.
So what happened then?
Jill finally asked when they were all calm enough to continue talking.
Oh, Mudgloom sputtered for a while, then I apologised and we let him in.
Edmund replied, grinning as he remembered.
They were our allies for 12 years after that.
Peter mused, rubbing his chin thoughtfully.
Then we blundered back through the wardrobe and ended up back here.
Oh, Wiggles!
Lucy giggled, shaking her head with a sad smile.
I miss their glum merry ways.
The 5 children sat in silence for a moment, none of them speaking as they remembered the place each of them longed to see again. Then Eustace sniffed the air curiously.
Do you smell something burning?
He asked to no one in particular.
The cookies!
Jill gasped, eyes widening as she spun around. Oven mitt on her hand, she carefully pulled the door of the oven open, and groaned.
What?
Eustace and Lucy asked simultaneously. Jill grabbed the cookie tray and pulled it out, revealing a batch of cookies, most of them brown and a few of them black. Eustace and Edmund both groaned, and Peter laughed half-heartedly.
Don't worry, Jill.
The king said, giving her a smile.
That's just the first few.
Lucy pushed past him and grabbed a spatula, standing beside Jill, who was blinking back tears of embarrassment and irritation.
I'll scrape those off, and we can put some more on,
she said quickly, smiling brightly at the younger girl. Jill gave her a grateful smile. Eustace came up behind them and took a look at the ruined cookies, whistling at the sight.
I thought you said you knew how to bake cookies, Pole.
He remarked, picking up one of the charred objects and looking it over carefully.
This thing isn't even edible.
It was the wrong thing to say.
Well, that's nice, Scrubb.
Jill spun around, face red and blue eyes blazing.
You volunteer me to make the cookies, tease me about salmonella, poke fun at my comments, steal the cookie dough, distract me so I forget about the cookies, and then you tell me I can't cook?
She ripped off the oven mitt and threw it at him, turning and storming out of the kitchen, cheeks flaming, and leaving a very bewildered Eustace standing there, holding the oven mitt and looking rather distressed. No one said anything for a moment. All 3 of the Pevensies just stood there, staring at their cousin, who was now turning rather red himself.
Aren't you going to go after her?
Lucy finally asked, giving him a significant look.
After her?
Eustace sputtered.
Go after Pole? When she's angry?
You were the one that roiled her up,
Edmund remarked, earning a glare from Eustace.
I didn't mean to. I was only stating the obvious. Heaven knows you can't eat burned cookies.
Their cousin protested.
But you didn't have to say so,
Lucy retorted sternly. No one spoke for another moment. Eustace stared at the kitchen door that Jill had gone through, still swinging back and forth. Then he swallowed hard.
But
Go on, Eustace.
Peter said quietly from his side of the room.
You're the one who began the quarrel. Go make it right.
Eustace looked down at his shoes and squeezed his eyes tightly shut.
Why must I have a high king for an older cousin?
He looked up again and locked eyes with Edmund. His cousin raised an eyebrow, and then jerked his head toward the door. With a sigh, Eustace marched forward and pushed through the door, just as Jill pushed through from the other side. The two collided in the doorway, and Jill fell forward, landing hard on the kitchen floor, while Eustace caught himself and grabbed onto the counter. Hesitating for only a fraction of a second, he reached down and grabbed her hand, pulling her gently to her feet.
You all right?
Jill nodded embarrassedly, blushing, but then meeting Eustace's gaze.
Sorry, I shouldn't have stormed off like that.
Eustace gave her an apologetic grin and shook his head.
My fault. I didn't mean it about the cookies.
Yes, you did.
Jill retorted, her eyes glinting. He shrugged and sighed.
Forgive me?
Of course.
There was a moment of silence as the two friends stared at each other, and then they started to smile. Then Edmund cleared his throat.
What I say? An old married couple, that's what you sound like. Quarrelling and forgiving each other. Just like that.
He snapped his fingers. Everyone in the room turned to Edmund and gave him a glare. Lucy elbowed him, and he raised his eyebrows.
What? What'd I say?
Eustace and Jill exchanged a grin, and then Jill marched over to the counter, grabbing a burnt cookie, and thrust it into a bewildered Edmund's hands.
Call us an old married couple again, and I'll make you eat the whole batch,
She threatened, frowning in mock seriousness, but eyes sparkling with fun.
This time you only get one.